wildlife area that's actually stipulated to in the analysis. I have some concerns going forward about the potential incompatibility of the public and private uses that are contained within, and I know this is prospective, but it is a policy that, would have affected the 16,000 acres that I do represent. And I certainly understand that hunting and fishing provides a great revenue source, and, we're trying to balance private ownership rights, private property rights, when they are trying to also coexist or collaborate with public uses. We have about 3,000 school children that go to the Yola Wildlife Area every year, and I just want to be sure that I understand your intent, but I'm just going to hold off today and hope that we can get some other questions answered as we go further.
We
so thank you.
Hunt tofu too.
That's right. Thank you.
All right, we have a motion by Ms. Olson, a second by Mr. Berryhill. Would you like to close?
I would indeed. I want to thank everybody for their wonderful comments and the testimony of the witnesses. I do want to address a couple of things that were said. First of all, this only affects those who are thinking about entering a very specific document called the Wildlife Conservation Easement with respect to their land. You can think of this as Williamson Act Light. You can think of it as many different things, but really what we're trying to do here is incentivize private landowners to turn their property over to the state and just specify that they have the right to continue to recreate on their property. So it's a very narrow set of circumstances, but it is a very important one. Those landowners, if they are farmers today, they have the right to kill and trap animals on their property already. What we're doing here is we're trying to preserve their ability to recreate, and that goes well beyond hunting and fishing, if they are so kind enough as to turn their property over to the state for preservation. The second thing that I want to address is some of the other comments that discuss the private-public nature of this, and that is that these are private agreements. These are contracts. These are contractual agreements whereby people who are landowners agree to keep their land in trust for the benefit of the state and often for wildlife conservation programs for time immemorial or for specified in the agreement. So I'm not too concerned about the danger of affecting public lands, but I do understand the concerns. So with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gatto. And I want to thank you for working with the committee. The amendments that you've taken are very important. I represent a district that has a tremendous amount of public land, but also an urban population base, or a suburban at least, with lots of non-hunting recreation. And I can't tell you how often I get contacts through my office, or email, et cetera, about people that have heard some rumor that the Department of Fish and Game is about to open up, hunting in their neighborhood or in their local park. And invariably, these are not true. But I think the sort of fear that hunting is coming to a neighborhood near you or to a park where you take your children certainly is a constant phantom that I'm having to battle in my district. I suspect I'm not alone in that regard. The amendments you've taken make it very, very clear that this is prospective. This is for situations where local restrictions on hunting for safety and other reasons are not going to be preempted. So those are sensible amendments, and appreciate your willingness to take them.
Thank you. I just want to thank the California Outdoor Heritage Alliance for their help with this bill as well. So thank you.
Thank you. Let's call the roll.
Do pass with amendments to appropriations. Huffman?
Aye.
Huffman, aye. Halderman?
Aye.
Halderman, aye. Berryhill?
Aye.
Berryhill, aye. Blumenfield?
Aye.
Blumenfield, aye. Campos? Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Gatto?
Aye.
Gatto, aye. Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Weso?
Aye.
Weso, aye. Jones? Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Olson?
Aye.
Olson, aye. Yamada? Yamada not voting.
All right, that bill is out. Congratulations. I am going to present the final bill of the day and hand the gavel back to my capable vice chair.
Mr. Huffman, are you ready to present your bill?
I am. Thank you,
Please
Madam
do.
Chair. I will be very brief here. This is AB 359. I'll be brief because it's a bill that passed this committee and passed the legislature last year. It is unchanged from what we brought to Governor Schwarzenegger's desk last year, and it's a very simple bill. We had a hearing, a lengthy hearing in this committee a few weeks back that talked about the importance of groundwater in the state of California. And I think increasingly, as we understand the volatility and the limited nature of our surface water supplies, the conflicts that continue to exacerbate our surface water shortage, people are understanding that groundwater may very well be the key to California's water future. In a normal year, it's about 30% of our state's water supply, but in dry years, that can climb as high as 40%. And we know that for some communities, year in and year out, it's 100%. They depend entirely on groundwater, and yet, as we heard in our hearing, it's a resource that in some places is managed well and in other places is not managed at all.
Madam Chairman, I move the bill. Or Madam Vice Chair, I move the bill.
There's been a motion to move the vote. Is there a second?
Thank you. So we've got a lot of work to do on groundwater. I don't want to suggest that this bill takes us anywhere close to as far as I feel like we need to go in this state, but it's a small, important step, and it has to do with recharge. Now, there's only one way that these critically important groundwater aquifers get filled back up, and that is from the surface. It can either happen by injection wells, or it can happen from natural percolation of surface waters. And so I think everyone would agree it's very important that we at least know where those recharge areas are. Ideally, I'd like to see much better integration of all of the decisions we make in land use planning and in other areas with not only the recharge areas, but groundwater elevations and all sorts of things. But this bill doesn't go there. This bill simply gets information out on the table, and I will say it doesn't even require that local land use planners do anything with that information. The assumption behind this bill is if you make information available, better decisions will be made. So with that, just in a nutshell, this bill says that if you want to come to the state of California and request grants for groundwater purposes, you're going to have to map your groundwater recharge areas so that we know this information will be out there and available. The state has a fairly substantial investment in these groundwater management grants. We have put out tens of millions of dollars already. We are going to continue to put out even more money in groundwater management grants. I think the least we can do is require as part of that that this basic and important information be known so that good decisions are made about this resource that we depend on so critically. So with that, I have some witnesses here in support.
Thank you, Mr. Huffman. Before the witnesses, does the committee have any questions?
I'll move the item.
It's been moved, but thanks. Please present your witnesses, and I would ask that you each limit yourself to 2 minutes.
Very good. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair and members of the committee. My name's Tim Parker, and I'm chairman of the Legislative Committee of the Groundwater Resources Association of California, and I'm here to testify in strong support of this bill, AB 359. I'm a professional geologist and certified hydrogeologist, and have been involved in groundwater resources management in this state for over 25 years. I would like to thank the Chair, Huffman, and his staff for the work they have put into this bill and its predecessor, as the Chair mentioned. The Groundwater Resources Association, which includes over 1,300 members of groundwater professionals located throughout California, strongly believes that this bill addresses an important element necessary for the protection of California's groundwater resources. And as the Chair already stated, it makes a couple of important changes. It requires that local water agencies, as a condition of receiving state grants and loans, map the groundwater recharge areas and provide that mapping information to the local planning agencies. And you may ask, why is that important, especially when you look out the window and see all that water? Well, it's important because recharge areas in a groundwater basins. Whoa.
Oh. Mr. Weso, are you injured? No. Okay. I would just suggest moving away from the glass. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, just be careful not to get near the glass.
Careful, there's glass all the way over here, so just be careful where you place your hands.
Maybe it's a sign to move on with this bill.
Endless fun we can have with this.
Mr. Weso, you're not bleeding? You're not bleeding?
Is there a doctor? Is there a doctor in the house?
Sir, I won't punish you for this, but there's 30 seconds left.
Well, that's a hard act to follow, but I'll just close by saying that we believe this measure is a modest but an important small step in protecting California's groundwater basins, and strongly request and I vote for this bill. Thank you, and I'll be available for questions.
Thank you.
Madam Chair and members, Duncan McFetridge representing the California Groundwater Coalition, which is a coalition of groundwater management agencies up and down the state of California. We thank the chair for reintroducing this bill. We have a little bit of work to do with some of the opponents. We're working with Mr. Holland and the committee, and hoping we can get there and hit the sweet spot on maybe some of these notification requirements. We'll see if we can get there, but we think this is a modest bill, like Tim said, and we hope to have your support. We urge an aye vote.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Jay Ziegler here on behalf of the 130,000 California members of the Nature Conservancy. Also today on behalf of NRDC. Both of our organizations have been working with Assembly Member Huffman and his staff and the sponsors and others on this language. Appreciate your efforts in this area. AB 359 does represent a smart, incremental, information-based approach that we believe will result in at least a first step towards sound long-term management of California's groundwater resources and the hydrologic systems that depend on them. Our work across California has consistently demonstrated the links between groundwater and surface water systems. And clearly the measurement of groundwater can have measurable and significant impacts on associated river and aquatic systems. So we think that this is a smart approach for better information among public, private, and other entities to understand better the importance of groundwater usage in California. And we support this bill wholeheartedly and appreciate an aye vote. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Are there any other witnesses in support? Please state your name, organization, and position on the bill.
Jim Metropolis on behalf of the Sierra Club. We are in support.
Lori Chen on behalf of Clean Water Action in support.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, Christopher Trinnell here on behalf of California Trout and Trout Unlimited in strong support of the legislation. Thank you.
Hello again, Yvonne Chambers, Planning and Conservation League in strong support.
Any other witnesses in support? Are there any witnesses in opposition? With respect, can we make room for the witnesses in opposition? Thank you. Please state your name and organization, and you have 2 minutes each for your testimony.
Thank you. Gail Delahunt with Western Growers. We oppose the bill unless amended for the reasons of notice to the landowner. Once the land has been mapped, and that significantly adds to groundwater recharge, we feel that it does narrow the area of notice. We believe that if the land planning agency has the ability to plan for the future, we would also like that ability to plan for the future. So we would like that notice. The uncertainty of the maps, what happens when they get to the planning agency, is of concern to us also. We have offered some language as of this morning, actually, regarding maybe we could use the technical advisory committee and make it mandatory that a planning agency person sit on that technical advisory committee for the 3030 plans and the groundwater management plans, and that way they have the ability to talk to each other. We are working with the sponsor. We believe that we're going to get there, and we appreciate this bill because we need our groundwater to grow food for people to eat.
Thank you. Next witness.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. Danny Merkley with the California Farm Bureau. We believe it is important to manage our groundwater basins. We believe it's important that our local entities be in charge of doing that. We would like to continue to see that happen. We'd like to continue to see assistance to those local agencies for doing so. But we also believe it is important to notify the individuals, families, and individual members that have paid the mortgages, paid the taxes in many instances for generations on these properties. We, too, encourage better communication between agencies. It's actually something we harp on quite a bit from Farm Bureau. We believe, as Ms. Delahant mentioned, that we do have a mechanism to thread that needle between notifying and improved communication. We've been working with the sponsor, communicating with the sponsor for quite some time now, actually going back to the end of last year, and had hoped we would have something worked out before this came to the policy committee. With that, I will say thank you, and we would ask that you vote no until this bill is amended.
Thank you both. Are there any questions from the committee members? Actually, is there any other witness in opposition? Seeing none, any questions from committee members? Mr. Berryhill?
Yeah, for starters, hasn't mapping already occurred on the groundwater basin? Seems like I've seen a map that showed some 200 groundwater basins already mapped. Is that correct?
A lot of this information is available. USGS and others have a lot of this information available, which is why, frankly, complying with the requirements of this bill is going to be a fairly simple proposition to folks as they pull their groundwater management plans together.
Well, the author well knows that sometimes I see little black helicopters and I get a little nervous when
they're going to help us map the
when the government starts to get involved with our water supply. What about the amendments that Western Growers and Farm Bureau talked about? Would those be acceptable?
Well, if I could, Mr. Berryhill, I'd like to speak to that. And just sort of taking in reverse order, I appreciate very much the spirit of the suggestion that maybe the Technical Advisory Committee constitution can help address some of their concerns. We'll keep talking about that. Maybe there's something we can do there. But I do want to mention that we took a fairly significant amendment last year that continues to be part of this bill to address this very issue. And just so the committee members know, in terms of notification to landowners, currently, when these groundwater management plans happen, there's no requirement that there be notification to landowner. We're actually giving them an upgrade in this bill because we are providing new notice requirements as part of groundwater management plans. So I think if notice is your concern, we're helping in that regard. But if the real concern is not so much the groundwater management plan and the mapping, but potentially land use changes that could eventually come from that information, everyone should also remember that there are very specific notice requirements to landowners before any of those land use changes can be made.
So what happens if I'm farming a family farm? I've been in the family for 100 years, and they map my area as a groundwater recharge area. I mean, what protections do I have as a private property owner of then having the state or the locals come in and disrupt my farming practice?
You would actually have more protection than you would under current law, because you would have notice requirements of the groundwater management plan where that process would begin to provide that mapping information.
Oh.
And then you would have all of the protections of current law against a zoning restriction that somehow affected your property value. But the other piece I want to emphasize is that if this is a concern about, let me just be very specific, I think this is an ag protection bill. Because I think what we're going to find as we map these recharge areas is that most of the critical recharge areas in California are under agricultural protection.
Sure.
Or under agricultural production. Right. So I think the more we can identify those and value those, the better job we're going to do at preserving ag land going forward.
Hey, I'm gonna hold off on this bill today. I'd like to talk with you more on it, though, as we go forward. I might be able to get to a support on it by the end.
Any other questions from the committee? Ms. Olson?
Thank you. Have there been any conversations with local government on this bill? If we're talking about state versus local doing the mapping, I would much prefer local government, but I'm concerned that at a time when local governments across the state are just crippling from budget cuts, that whether they will have the manpower or even the resources to carry out this mandate. And I'm very concerned about putting more mandates on local government right now.
Then you should like this bill because there are no mandates in it.
Doesn't it require them to do the mapping?
No, does not require anyone to do anything, as a matter of fact. I hate to underscore the diminutive nature of my own legislation, but the fact is, you don't have to do any of this. The only reason you would even want to map the recharge areas is if you want to avail yourselves of state grants for groundwater management purposes. And by the way, we've added a provision that says you can use some of those grants to do the mapping. Then, after the mapping is done, after this information is known, we've asked that it be provided to local government, but there's no requirement at all that they do anything with it. Again, this is a measure that sort of proceeds on the faith, on the assumption that with information, better decisions will follow.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions from the committee? Mr. Hoffman, would you like to close?
I will let that last statement be my close and respectfully request your aye vote.
Thank you very much. Having no commentary on this bill, I'd like to ask the Secretary to call the roll.
Do pass the Local Government Committee. Huffman?
Aye.
Huffman, aye. Halderman? Berryhill? Blumenfield?
Aye.
Blumenfield, aye. Campos? Fong?
Aye.
Fong, aye. Gatto? Gatto, aye. Hernandez? Hueso?
Aye.
Hueso, aye. Jones? Lara?
Aye.
Lara, aye. Olson?
Abstain.
Olson, abstain. Yamada? Aye. Yamada, aye. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Congratulations.
Mr. Hoffman, your bill is out. Did you want to leave it open? Yes, on call? Bill is on call.
Yeah, I'm just sending a note for Jones to get from
Yes, out of you. We have to break more glass.
I didn't throw anything.
We'll leave the roll open for about 3 or 4 more minutes to allow members to add on.